In chapter 8, we are going to talk about the school age years. So, when we get to school age and adolescence, language development is more subtle than it is with toddlerhood and preschool. Again, we saw tons of growth in those toddlerhood and preschool years. And while we do see growth in the school age and adolescence, it's just a little bit more subtle. Two processes that differentiate school age children from younger children is shifting sources of language input and the acquisition of metalinguistic competence. Before school age, children's sole source of language is oral, but once they learn to read, they acquire language through text as well. And around age 8, they shift from learning to read to reading to learn. Interestingly, as well, their language development becomes individualized based on their interests. So, a child who's really into cars, like the textbook example, will learn words like transmission and spark plugs that a child that's interested in animals would not be exposed to. When we looked in a previous chapter, we looked at that print and phonological awareness play an important part in reading. Between the preschool years and adulthood, children learn to read generally, progressing through a series of developmental stages. Stage 1 usually happens between ages 5 and 7. Children begin to decode or sound out words. And during this phase, there are often substitution errors. So they come to a word that they see that starts with a C, and so they guess that the word is cat versus maybe the word could. Stage 2 is usually 7 to 8 years of age. During this stage, they hone their decoding skills and they become more proficient with high frequency words. So, those words that they see often, they become very proficient at reading. Reading familiar books with high frequency words helps with their fluency, which refers to reading that is efficient, well paced, and free of errors. And as this increases, they become less focused on the print itself and begin to focus more on gaining meaning from the text. When children are so focused on decoding words, they can lose the meaning of the sentence by the time they get to the end of the sentence. Stage 3 is around ages 9 to 14. Children are reading to gain new information and are solidly reading to learn by the end of this stage. This stage helps expand vocabulary, build background and world knowledge, and develop strategic reading habits. Stage 4 is 14 to 18 years old. Students learn to navigate increasingly difficult concepts and the texts that describe them. At this stage, they're able to understand multiple viewpoints on an issue. And stage 5 is 18 and above. During this stage, readers read selectively to suit their purposes. Readers at this stage use advanced cognitive processes such as analysis, synthesis, and prediction to construct meaning from text. So this is going to be the stage that we are all in. Metalinguistic competence is the ability to think about and analyze language as an object of attention. Many activities in school draw on language for analysis. Two types of metalinguistic competence children achieve in the school age years are phonological awareness and figurative language. As a reminder, phonological awareness is a child's sensitivity to the sound structure of language. We talked about some of the early phonological awareness skills they master in preschool, such as segmenting words from sentences and detecting and producing rhymes. But if you will remember, they also have later developing skills, including awareness of the smallest units of sounds, including blending, segmenting, and manipulating. And these usually develop by age 7. Figurative language is language that people use in non-literal and abstract ways. People use figurative language to evoke mental images in the minds of the listeners or to provide emphasis or highlight something in an interesting way. And there's several types of figurative language. Metaphors convey similarity between two ideas or objects by stating that those two ideas or objects are the same. An example would be, all the world's a stage, or the girl in the pool is a fish. A simile is similar to a metaphor but uses like or as when making the comparison. An example would be flat as a pancake or like a bump on a log. Children's ability to understand and produce similes and metaphors is related to their performance on measures of general cognition, language, and academic achievements. Hyperbole uses exaggerations for emphasis and effect. An example would be, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, or I nearly died laughing. Idioms are expressions containing both literal and figurative meaning, such as, I've put that on the back burner, and we're in the same boat. Understanding idioms improves throughout the school age years and into adulthood. Irony and sarcasm are types of figurative language for which a speaker's intentions differ from the literal meaning of the words he or she uses. Irony refers to unmet general expectations that are not the fault of an individual, whereas sarcasm refers to a specific individual's failure to meet an expectation. And finally, proverbs are statements expressing conventional values, beliefs, and wisdom of society, such as blood is thicker than water, or every cloud has a silver lining. As children mature to school age and adolescence, they continue to make gains in language form, content, and use. In phonology, like we discussed, we see accomplishments in their phonological awareness skills. We also see progress in their morphophonemic development, which relates to the development in the interaction between morphological and phonological processing. So, for example, the phoneme produced for plural words is not the same. We have watches, dogs, and cats. Watches ends with the is sound. Dogs ends with the z sound. And cats ends with the s sound. All of those indicate plurality, but they are different phonemes. When we look at morphology, we see continued development with derivational prefixes and suffixes. Prefixes like un and non, and suffixes like hood and meant develop. This can change the meaning or the class of the word. When we look at achievements in syntax, it relates to complex syntax. This refers to advanced grammatical structures that mark a literate language style. We see these structures more frequently in written language than in oral language. Things like using a passive voice is often seen in writing. Things such as persuasive writing or narrative tasks often demonstrate their abilities with complex syntax. And then here are the timelines for phonology. So we see them starting to master those morphophonemic rules for plurals. We see them using stress and emphasis to express precise intent. So there's that timeline. Syntax and morphology, you can see the progression there where they're using passive voice, they're understanding if and though. School-age children make gains in semantics. Most of these occur as a result of reading. First, we see expansion in their receptive and expressive vocabularies. Upon graduation, they have over 60,000 words. School-age children learn new words through direct instruction, contextual abstraction, and morphological analysis. Direct instruction involves learning the meaning of the word directly from a more knowledgeable source, such as a teacher or a dictionary. They basically learn the definition. Contextual abstraction uses context clues in both spoken and written forms to determine the meanings of unfamiliar words. Morphological analysis involves analyzing the lexical, inflection, and derivational morphemes of unfamiliar words to infer their meaning. As the lexicons of school-age children grow, they encounter more and more words and realize that many words have multiple meanings. Being able to supply multiple meanings for words requires no lexical knowledge, but metalinguistic knowledge. Another area of achievement is understanding lexical ambiguity. Lexical ambiguity occurs when words and phrases have multiple meanings. That was a real bear. That has multiple meanings. It could mean I actually see a bear, or that was something that was really hard. This ties to those multiple meaning words. We have words like homophones, homographs, homonyms. The textbook notes that we see lexical ambiguity and a lot of humor, such as, is your refrigerator running? You better go catch it. Finally, we have the achievement of literate language. This is language that is highly decontextualized. To understand literate language, they must be able to use language without the aid of context clues to support meaning. They must rely on language itself to make meaning. Moving from contextualized to decontextualized language is important for discourse in school settings. And then here we have our timeline for semantic development. Finally, in the school age years and beyond, we see development in pragmatics, specifically with functional flexibility, conversational abilities, and narrative development. Functional flexibility refers to the ability to use language for a variety of communicative purposes or functions. This flexibility is increasingly important for school-age children who must be able to compare and contrast, persuade, hypothesize, explain, classify, and predict in the context of their classroom activities. Two notable types of discourse we see develop are expository discourse and persuasive discourse. Expository discourse is the language used to convey information. Think about how important this is for learning and the academic setting. As we talked about earlier, we also see persuasive discourse develop, which uses language to convince another listener or audience to adopt a certain stance or to take action consistent with a particular point of view. The textbook also points out that at this age, a child's ability to lie improves. During the school age years, we see conversational abilities improve. Children can stay on topic longer, make a large number of relevant comments, shift topics smoothly, and recognize and repair breakdowns. They also become more proficient at understanding and using indirect request. Do you know what time it is? Versus asking what time it is. What time is it? Finally, we see improvement in the ability to tell stories and different types of stories. Their narratives become more mature and elaborate. We see story grammar emerge, which is the components of a narrative, such as the character and the setting, as well as the rules that govern how these components are organized. And then here we see the timeline for pragmatic development. When we look at factors that contribute to achievements for this age group, we'll look at gender and aging. In school age and adolescence, we see gender differences in vocabulary and conversational styles. Research shows that women use more polite words, and men use coarse words and swear words more. It also shows that males use more assertive language than women. Males and females have different ways of being friendly in conversations. There are also differences in how they use language. Females usually face their conversational partners and make eye contact, whereas men are more likely to take a more distant stance and make less eye contact. Men change conversational topics more frequently, whereas women tend to exhaust conversational topics more thoroughly. When we look at aging, we start to see some word finding difficulties, like the word is on the tip of my tongue. It is also noted that speech rate decreases as adults age. There's also some decline in the ability to understand others' prosody or characteristics that convey emotion. When we look at measuring language for this population, we see the same types of measurements, screenings, comprehensive evaluations, progress monitoring assessments, and we're also still going to be doing those language sample analysis.